Hello guys and welcome to today's session. In today's session we are going to talk about how we can transition our Windows devices from on-prem to cloud using Intune. So this is what I have in the agenda today. First we are going to start and understand what exactly is cloud native. What are the benefits of going cloud native? That is, what's the benefit of doing an Azure AD join or Entra ID join of a device? Then we are going to, this is the main point, the main talking point of this session. We are going to talk about the different approaches that we have if we want to transition our existing Windows devices from hybrid Azure AD joined to Entra ID joined. We are going to understand all the different use cases, as well as I'll provide you tips and tricks on which one to use and when. We'll talk about some other third-party tools that are available. We'll reach to a conclusion, and then after that migration is done, or rather before the migration can be done, we will talk about other relevant factors as well, which is migrating the applications from on-prem to Azure, migrating the policies from on-premise GPO to Intune, and migrating the user's data. So this is going to be a jam-packed session and hopefully a shorter one. However, I feel that this one is of paramount importance. The reason why I say that is because right now you would have seen all the organizations want to reduce their cost and move from on-prem to Azure. All the organizations want that, so it is just a matter of time before you or the organization that you are working for or the project that you are working for will have a similar requirement. Therefore, I think that this session is going to provide us a lot of insights. So before we get into the migration techniques, first I wanted to lay the ground and talk about what exactly is cloud native for Windows devices. So cloud native endpoints and all that I'm going to talk in today's session is relevant for Windows only. Okay. So cloud native endpoints are devices which can be deployed and used from anywhere over the internet without any dependency on on-premise. So let's say that I have a Windows device right now, and if I'm able to deploy that Windows device without having the need to get an IT admin, call the device to the office and provision it and all of that, then that methodology is a cloud native methodology. Now this is a vague statement. If I have to explain it in more technical terms, then cloud native endpoints are Windows devices that are deployed using Windows Autopilot, which are joined to Microsoft Entra ID, not Microsoft Entra ID or Microsoft Azure AD registered, but Azure AD joined, not hybrid Azure AD joined, but Azure AD joined. So this is an important term here. The devices which are Azure AD joined, and obviously if the automatic enrollment is set, then devices which are enrolled to Intune as well. Now the key point here is technically cloud native devices are ones which are autopiloted, but there are other ways of joining a device to Azure AD also without autopiloting them. All of them is something that we are going to look in this session. But I hope we have understood what is cloud native. Cloud native is a device which exists only in cloud, that is only in Azure or Entra, and it does not exist in the on-premise. So if you have taken a device which is in the work group, instead of joining the device to the on-premise domain, we are going to join it directly to Azure or Entra. How are we going to do that? Well, as I said, there are various ways. Autopilot is one of them. We are going to discuss all of that in this session. Okay, now after understanding what exactly is cloud native, I just want to clear the air and talk about the benefits of doing an Azure AD join or benefits of going cloud native. Most of this is self-explanatory, but then again, this presentation would be incomplete if I don't talk about the benefits or the advantages of this approach. So the first advantage of this approach is we don't have to worry about connecting to VPN. Now let's say that you have an on-premise device. Let's say that you have a fresh device which you want to connect to your on-premise. Now your device, which is currently in the work group, is a brand new device, can only talk with your domain controller either if it is there in your corporate LAN, or if it is there anywhere in the internet, then it needs to have a VPN connectivity so that it can talk with your on-premise domain controller. However, with cloud native, that is not needed because the on-premise domain controller is replaced by Azure, which is accessible over the internet. So first is we don't have to worry about connecting the device to VPN. Second is we can deploy from anywhere. By anywhere, we mean anywhere wherever there is an internet. Third is simplified management for all platforms. Once the device is Azure AD joined or Entra AD joined, the management of the device becomes simplified. There are a lot of options that we have at our disposal, which we are going to see later. But there are many settings, many policies, many management capabilities that we get only when the device is Azure AD joined or Entra AD joined. Okay, so we are going to get all those benefits. Talking about benefits, one of the benefits is single sign-on. So let's say that you have got Azure AD joined your device. You have logged into the device. If Outlook is installed in your device, the moment you launch Outlook is going to work on single sign-on, and it won't ask you to enter your password each time. You just have to log into the device once. Your credentials are going to be carry forwarded, and it's going to be used to log into any M365 or any application in that sense which you might have. So the next advantage is single sign-on. That is, you are signing in only once, and then that single sign-on credentials is being used for signing into other applications which might be there in the device. And lastly, secure access without passwords. So if your device is cloud native, you can use something like Windows Hello for Business, which lets you set a PIN and it lets you go passwordless. So in summary, I hope we have understood what are the benefits of going cloud native over sticking with the traditional approach of doing a hybrid Azure AD join or joining your machine to the on-premise domain. Okay. All right. Now let us say that I am an organization and my organization has, let's say, 1000 devices. And all my 1000 Windows devices are currently hybrid Azure AD joined. Now, when I say hybrid Azure AD joined, how did my device get hybrid Azure AD joined to begin with? We already know that, right? For a device to get hybrid Azure AD joined, the steps that we follow is, first we join the device to the on-premise domain, then we use something called Azure AD Connect tool. That Azure AD Connect tool can be used to sync the device objects of the devices from an OU in your on-premise domain controller to Azure. And once that happens, the device object appears in Azure as well. And that state of the device is known as hybrid Azure AD joined, wherein a device is present in your on-premise domain controller as well as an object of that device is present in Azure as well, which has been synced to Azure using Azure AD Connect tool. Hence the terminology hybrid, because it is present in both the cases. So how do we get a Windows device hybrid Azure AD joined? We know that now. Okay. Now let's talk about a use case wherein I have an organization which has got 1000 devices which are hybrid Azure AD joined. Now I want to get rid of my on-premise and I want to move to cloud native, because when I move to cloud native, I'm going to get all these advantages, right? So what does Microsoft recommend in this scenario? Microsoft's recommendation is, out of the 1000 devices that I have, whenever I plan on upgrading the operating system of any device, that is when we should do the cutover from hybrid to cloud native. So let's say that I'm doing an OS upgrade or fresh installation of an image from Windows 10 to Windows 11. That is when I should take that device and get that device Azure AD joined rather than sticking with hybrid. The second is device refresh. If let's say that I've got 1000 devices, now obviously there will be a time to live for those devices, right? Let's say after 3 years or after 5 years, whenever the old device is going away and whenever you are going to get a new device, that is when Microsoft recommends that the new device should be directly autopiloted. That is, you should directly do a Azure AD join of the new device and the existing device should be left as is. So firstly, I wanted to clarify and call out what is Microsoft's recommendation to address this use case. Now, that being said, well, if this was the recommendation and this is what we have to follow, it is pretty much straightforward, right? But now here is where things get complicated. Let us say that I have got 3 lakh devices in my environment. I've got 300,000 devices. Now, let's say that out of those 300,000 devices, all the devices are already running with Windows 11. So this is something that we are not going to do, that is upgrading from Windows 10 to Windows 11, because the devices are already running with Windows 11. And let us say that most of the devices out of those 3 lakh devices are new, or the devices that we have, they don't have a refresh coming up in next 3 to 4 years, because some organization might choose to keep devices for 6 or 7 years, right? It's at the organization's disposal to decide when the refresh cycle is going to happen. So let us say that my device is already running with Windows 11. The refresh of the device is already done and there is no refresh that is coming up for that device in the near future. And my device is hybrid Azure AD joined, but we want to get the benefits of going cloud native. What do we do then? Well, in that case, one approach could be migrating those devices, or rather migrating is a wrong terminology here. The right terminology is transitioning. The other approach could be transitioning the existing devices from hybrid Azure AD join to cloud native, rather than waiting for 4 or 5 years for the device refresh to happen if the OS upgrade has already happened. Now, this diagram is the meat of this video, wherein I have illustrated the different approaches that we have if we want to transition our hybrid Azure AD joined Windows device to cloud native right now. If we don't want to wait for the device refresh to happen at a later point of time, then these are the different options that we have. I am going to talk about all the options one by one and share some tips and tricks on which one should be used in which use cases. Let's try to first get a 1000 feet overview of what this diagram or what this flow chart is all about. What are we trying to do? We are trying to migrate Intune managed on-prem Windows devices to cloud native. That is what we are trying to do. Now we have got 2 possibilities here. First possibility is the device that we are trying to migrate. If that device is already enrolled to Intune and currently is managed via SCCM or GPO. That is one possibility. The second possibility is if the device that we have right now, which is hybrid Azure AD joined, if we had hybrid Azure AD joined it using a hybrid Azure AD join autopilot profile. Okay, this is also a use case. So irrespective of whether you are coming from here, so you can be here or you can be here. Irrespective of where you are, our use case is reaching here. So whether you are at 1 or whether you are at 2, we want to reach to point 3, wherein our devices are Azure AD joined. It is no longer hybrid Azure AD joined. Now, if your device, again, very quick overview, I think we should already know this, but the first use case is talking about devices which are Intune enrolled and config manager or GPO managed. Now let's break down this use case. How do you get to this use case? Well, let's say that I take a device, I join that device to the on-premise domain. After joining that device to the on-premise domain, you can set up Azure AD Connect tool and get the device hybrid Azure AD joined. So Azure AD Connect tool is going to sync the record of the device to Azure. After that, let's say that you have targeted a group policy to that device, which is going to enroll the device to Intune. This is the traditional approach of enrolling a device which is hybrid Azure AD joined to Intune using group policy. That is one option. Let's say that that is your use case, or that is your current status. Or let us say that you have a device which is, you took a device, you joined that device to the on-premise domain, and then you were managing your device via SCCM. Okay, so what you did was the SCCM client was deployed to the device, then you got your device hybrid Azure AD joined, and then you enabled co-management in the device. When you enabled co-management to the device got enrolled to Intune. So irrespective of whether your device is joined to the on-premise domain and enrolled to Intune using group policy, or if your device is joined to the on-premise domain and you're managing your device via SCCM and now you have enabled co-management, due to which the device is currently enrolled to Intune as well, you are falling under the use case 1. So we are going to first understand the different approaches that we have in use case 1, and then the use case 2 is, let's say that you deployed something called an hybrid Azure AD join autopilot profile, and that is how you got the device autopiloted, and that is what your current status or use case is. That comes under use case 2. So depending upon what is our current status, the approach for transitioning is going to be different, or it's going to be according. And that is what we are going to understand right now. As of now, let's not overcomplicate things. I just want you to understand, I hope you understand what this block is talking about. That is, this is what we are trying to achieve. Migrating devices from on-premise hybrid Azure AD join to cloud native. Now, your current status can either be this, or your current status can either be this. If your current status is this, then you have got these two options, and inside of these two options you have got 6 options inside of it. We are going to decide all of that one by one, and if the use case is 2, then you have other options. Okay, now let us understand each scenario one by one. So first we are going to understand a scenario wherein devices are hybrid Azure AD joined and either enrolled to Intune via group policy, or they are enrolled to Intune by enabling co-management. Now, one way by which we can transition a device in this state to a device in this state, that is get it cloud native, is first by using autopilot. Okay. Now, when you're using autopilot, you can use autopilot with config manager, without config manager, or OSD. We are going to look at all these options one by one. First option that we are going to look at is without config manager. And this is the recommended approach that we should have. Why? Because if you are not using config manager, if you're using config manager, then it means that you still have SCCM, right? Which means that SCCM is still running in one of your on-premise servers. Which means even though you have migrated your device from on-prem to cloud, there is still on-premise dependency. So our North Star or our goal should be migrating a device from here to here using this methodology. That is number 1, wherein the device is going to be, so now let's understand what is going to be the end state. The end state of a device, if you are in use case 1 and you take the option 1, the end state is the Windows device is going to be Azure AD joined or Entra ID joined, it's going to be managed from cloud and it is not going to have any SCCM client in it. Okay. All right. Now, how do we do this? Let's say that you want to go with this approach. How do you exactly follow this approach? So our use case one is Entra Hybrid joined and Intune enrolled Windows devices, irrespective of whether they were managed via config manager or whether they were managed via GPO. We need to migrate these devices to cloud native, and we are right now using an option of autopilot. Okay, so our devices right now are already hybrid Azure AD joined, right? That is what our previous diagram was saying, right? The devices over here are hybrid Azure AD joined. So if the devices are hybrid Azure AD joined, then all we have to do is create a group of those devices. Now create a autopilot profile, target a autopilot profile to a group of this device. And when you are creating an autopilot profile, there is this option in the autopilot profile which says convert all targeted device to autopilot. So now let's take a little bit of background. What exactly? Let me in the next slide first show you what option I'm talking about. I'll go to the portal as well and I'll show it to you. This is the option that I'm talking about. So these two screenshots are from an autopilot profile created in the Intune portal. When we create an autopilot profile in the Intune portal, there is this option which says convert all targeted devices to autopilot. Let's say that I have a group containing 5 devices. All these 5 devices are right now hybrid Azure AD joined, and they have never been autopiloted before. Now, if you are familiar with autopilot, there is a prerequisite of doing autopilot. That prerequisite is you need to get the serial number or hardware hash of the devices which you need to autopilot and upload it to the Intune portal. That is a prerequisite. Now let us say that I have got 1000 devices which are already hybrid Azure AD joined. Before I can autopilot them, do I need to deploy a script or do I need to go to each device and collect the hardware hash of each device or serial number of each device and then come to the Intune portal, upload a CSV containing all those hardware hashes? The answer is no. Intune has made it very simple for you. If your device is already enrolled to Intune, then why do you need to go to each device and run a script or run a command to collect the hardware hash and then upload it to Intune? Intune is smart enough to do it for you on your behalf. How does Intune does it? All you have to do is you have to tell Intune which devices you want to convert from hybrid Azure AD join to autopilot. You just need to create a group. Over here, as you can see, I've created a group of 5 devices, and then I will assign this autopilot profile to this group, and over here I will select this setting which says convert all targeted devices to autopilot. What is this going to do? What this is going to do is, let's read this text box which is coming from the Intune portal itself. It says select yes to register all targeted devices to autopilot if they are not already registered. Meaning, when I say registered with autopilot, how do you register a device with autopilot? You register it by uploading the hardware hash or the serial number. If your devices are not already uploaded to autopilot, you don't need to go to each device, get the hardware hash and do all of that manually. All you need to do is select yes. The next time registered device go through the Windows UBI experience, they will go through the assigned autopilot scenario. How? Because those devices will already be registered with autopilot. Intune will do it for you. Please note that certain autopilot scenarios require specific minimum builds of Windows. Yes, obviously, this is only going to work if Windows autopilot prerequisite have been met. And Windows Autopilot has other prerequisites also, right? Like minimum operating system version. If you want to do autopilot of Windows 7, that's not going to work, right? Or Windows 8, that is not going to work. It needs to be Windows 11 or Windows 10 or Windows 11 with a specific build version, which you need to check in our documentation. So that is what it is saying. Please make sure your device has the required minimum build to go through. And it says that removing this profile won't affect the device because all right, so not relevant. So what I'm trying to get at is, this point is very, very important. If you let me just paraphrase everything once again. Let us say you have a Windows device which is hybrid Azure AD joined, that is joined to your on-premise domain and present in Azure. And if it is not hybrid Azure AD joined, you can get it hybrid Azure AD joined just by installing the Azure AD Connect tool and syncing the records. If it is hybrid Azure AD joined and currently enrolled to Intune, irrespective of whether it is enrolled using group policy or irrespective of whether it was enrolled using the SCCM client and enabling co-management, if that is your current status and you want to remove the dependency from your on-premise, all you need to do is you need to use autopilot in these devices to get them to cloud native. But if let's say you've got 10,000 or 1 lakh devices, how do you use autopilot? Because to use autopilot, the devices need to be registered with autopilot. And for the devices to be registered with autopilot, you have to go to each device and get the serial number or hardware hash. However, this option in the Intune portal makes it easier for you, wherein you just have to create a autopilot profile with this setting set to yes and assign it to a group of hybrid Azure AD joined devices, and Intune service is going to take care of reaching out to the device, collecting the hardware hash and uploading it directly into the portal under autopilot so that the device becomes registered with the autopilot service. Okay. And then the other settings that you need to select in the autopilot profile obviously is over here. You need to select the option join to Microsoft Entra ID as Microsoft Entra joined, not hybrid joined, because you have an option of doing hybrid joined over here as well, because there is an autopilot profile called hybrid Azure AD joined autopilot profile, which we will get to later. But we don't need to do that. Over here we need to select Microsoft Entra joined. And if it's a device associated with a user, then you need to choose user driven. If it's a device which is not attributed to a user, then you can do self-deploying, like if it's a userless device. Okay. And then you have I have not mentioned the other settings which are not relevant. There are other settings as well in the autopilot profile, like the screens that you would like to hide in the OOBE. Like over here you have an option of hiding the license and agreement screen or showing it. I haven't spoken about ESP over here because that is not really relevant. Our goal right now is talking about how I can move a device which is Windows from hybrid Azure AD join to cloud native using Intune. And the first approach is using autopilot. Now let us say that you have done this. You have created an autopilot profile. You have assigned that autopilot profile to a group of hybrid Azure AD joined devices, and you have selected this option as yes. And you have also selected Microsoft Entra join over here. What this is going to do, this is going to register all the devices which were there in this group with the autopilot service. But is this enough? Is this going to convert your existing hybrid Azure AD joined devices to cloud native or to Azure AD join? No, it's not. For this autopilot profile to take effect, which is going to do Microsoft Entra ID join, you will have to factory reset the device, which is very, very important. Hence, we need to go to the Intune portal and we need to do a wipe of the device. Now the admin can do a wipe of the device. So there is something called retire and there is something called wipe, right? When you retire a device, again, you can check the documentation. It's very clear over there, but just FYI, when you do a retire of the device, only the corporate data from the device is removed. When you do a wipe of the device, it is equivalent to doing a factory reset. And when you do a wipe of the device comes back to the OOBE screen, and only after that screen the autopilot profile is going to come down to the device. Okay. Alright, now I am just going to take a detour here for a couple of minutes and stress on one fact. You might say that, oh, I've got 3 lakh devices, all those 3 lakh devices are hybrid Azure AD joined, and they were currently managed via SCCM with co-management enabled, and or they were currently managed via group policy. Now I want to go cloud native, but I have to reset the device or I have to wipe the device. Well, yes, you have to. There is no other way of transitioning, and that is why I said I use the word transition and not migrate. This is unenrolling the device and enrolling the device again. This is a transition and not a migration. There is no way by which you can just do a next finish and the device will be migrated from hybrid Azure AD joined to Azure AD joined. You have to disjoin from Azure, do a reset, and then use autopilot to join it to Azure AD. So doing a factory reset or a wipe of the device is mandatory. Now that being said, at the end of this session, there is a third party tool that I am going to talk about, which is a licensed tool, and they claim that you can do this migration or you can move this from a hybrid Azure AD join to Azure AD join using that tool without needing to reset the device. But Microsoft does not recommend using any such tool, and there is a very high amount of chance that if you use any such tools later on you might run into some issues, and then obviously support is not going to help you troubleshoot that. So this is the Microsoft recommended cleanest and the best way if you want to transition your device from hybrid Azure AD join to cloud native. Now, obvious question would be, if I wipe the device, all the data in the device is going to be gone, right? How am I going to address that use case? Well, there are ways of addressing that. There are things that you can do before you initiate a wipe from here to make sure that users' data is not impacted. What are the things we can do? The things that we can do is we can tell the user to, instead of saving anything in their C drive or anything in their local disk, saving everything in OneDrive. That is option 1. Option 2 is, on top of that, there is something called OneDrive known folder move, which is going to sync everything from a specific location, that is users desktop, users download folder, and users documents, to OneDrive automatically. User does not have to necessarily save everything in OneDrive, even though they have saved everything in their desktop. By using a policy called OneDrive known folder move from Intune, automatically everything from the user's desktop is going to be backed up in OneDrive. I am going to talk about all of that in detail later in this tutorial. But for now, I just wanted to take a small detour and let you guys know, whenever you have to migrate from on-premise hybrid Azure AD join to cloud native, there is no other Microsoft supported way than doing a wipe and a reset of the device. Okay. All right. Now coming back here. Right now we are talking about this use case. Which use case are we talking about? We are talking about the use case wherein the devices are Intune enrolled and maybe managed via SCCM and Intune, that is co-management is enabled, or maybe managed via group policy, and we want to get to this end state of getting the devices cloud native and use Windows autopilot. Okay, so the first option was not using config manager, which is the recommended approach because we want to remove the dependency from config manager. All right, coming back to my slide here. Since the device records are already present in Entra, as the devices are Entra Hybrid already joined. All we must do is first create a device group containing the devices. Now create a autopilot profile and select this setting which says that convert all targeted devices to autopilot, which we just saw in the next slide. And then set the autopilot profile as Microsoft Entra joined. I have mentioned that because there is another option in autopilot profile which says Microsoft Hybrid Azure AD joined. We don't want to do that. And then click on deploy. The device, when this autopilot profile is deployed, there was this setting, right? This setting is going to automatically register all the devices in that group with autopilot service. And since these devices are registered with the autopilot service, they will undergo the autopilot provisioning the next time the device undergoes a reset. So for that, we need to go to the Intune portal and we need to do a wipe of the device, which is going to initiate a reset in the device, and the device is going to come back to the OOBE screen. And once that happens, then the autopilot profile is going to come down to the device and it's going to work as expected. Now, before I go into the portal, let me share some tips and tricks on when this option should be used. And then I will quickly switch to the portal and show this use case from the portal end. Now, one option, now as I said, this is the recommended approach. This is what Microsoft recommends, hands down, if it is possible. What do I mean by this? By this, I mean using a autopilot profile and going cloud native, and in that autopilot profile selecting that option which says converting all your existing hybrid Azure AD joined devices to autopilot, so that you don't have to go to each device, extract the hardware hash and register the device with the autopilot service. Migrating, again I'm using the term migrating here, but in the true sense it's not migrating, it is transitioning. Transitioning a device from Entra Hybrid to cloud native with Intune enrollment is best achieved using autopilot, and this methodology is seamless and the device gets provisioned automatically as a part of OOBE experience. And since we are doing a wipe, we have to make sure that either the user backs up the data manually to OneDrive, or we are deploying a policy from Intune called known folder move for OneDrive, which is going to move any file which is present in, let's say, desktop or downloads or documents to OneDrive automatically. User does not have to take any action. Now you might say that what if my user does not use OneDrive? Well, if your user does not use OneDrive, first thing would be, well, telling the user to use it. But let's say that OneDrive is not used in your organization, then, well, you have to follow a manual approach. That is, you have to tell the user that, you know what, take a external hard disk, back up your data there, and once you have a new device, just copy paste back, or maybe giving them a shared folder location wherein they can copy all their data, and once they have the new device which is Azure AD joined, they can copy the data back. But then again, that is just an option. I'm not recommending that. Most often than not, customers who have Intune and who have their devices Intune enrolled will be having the licenses to use OneDrive as well. Now let us say that you don't want to use this setting, then there is a manual way also. That is, you can go to each device, or you can deploy a script maybe, which is going to get the Windows autopilot info, and then it is going to give you that info or the hardware ID of the device in a CSV. Now the CSV needs to be uploaded into the Intune portal, and it is going to do the same thing which this setting would have done for you automatically. Okay. All right. So now I am switching over to my Intune portal. All we have to do is go to Windows enrollment, and over here, for Windows Autopilot, you can see there are two sections. One is something called Autopilot version 2, or known as Autopilot device preparation, and there is something called Windows Autopilot. This is the traditional or legacy, if you would call it. You can use either. I am going to go with the traditional one. So all I have to do is go over here, click on Windows Autopilot profile. Let's call this converting hybrid to cloud native, and let's call this APAC. Okay, and this is the setting I was talking about, convert all targeted devices to autopilot. So this autopilot profile will be assigned to a group. That group is going to contain hybrid Azure AD joined and Intune enrolled devices, which could be devices which are Intune enrolled, which were Intune enrolled using group policy, or which were Intune enrolled and co-managed using the SCCM client, irrespective. So all those devices are currently they were not autopiloted. That's the bottom line. Those devices were enrolled using group policy or SCCM client, but they were not historically autopiloted. Therefore, they are not registered with the autopilot service. Therefore, now instead of going to each device and extracting the hardware hash, all we have to do is set this toggle to yes, and then click on next. This is, again, I'm not going to go very deep into this. I've done a separate tutorial on autopilot. Over here, just know that there are two kinds of autopilot profiles. One is user driven, wherein a device is used by a specific user, and then there is self-deploying, wherein devices are not attributed to a specific user. In this case, we are talking about user driven, so I'll select user driven over here, and most importantly, the second option, which is the second drop down, which is join devices to Entra ID as Microsoft Entra joined. We don't want to do a Microsoft Entra hybrid joined because our devices are already hybrid joined. We are right now doing this activity to transition them to cloud native, right? So obviously this option is going to be Microsoft Entra joined, and then whichever option in the whichever screens in the OOBE you want to hide, you can hide them, or whichever ones you want to show, you can show them, right? All these options are there. You can select the language, location, device naming template, whatever you would like to have. And then next, and the main screen here is in the assignment option. We just have to add a device group here, and that device group should contain the devices which are Windows hybrid Azure AD joined. This policy is going to come down to that device. I'll just do a next and then create. This policy is going to come down to the device. The device will be registered with the autopilot service, but this is 50% of the work. This profile or this autopilot policy is not going to convert the existing device from hybrid to cloud native. The second part, or the rest 50% of the work, is you will have to go to a specific device, like let's say this test device, and you will have to do a wipe of that device. So when you do a wipe of that device, and then over here, you have to do a wipe. If you want to keep the enrollment state and the associated user account, you can do that, and you can continue to wipe even if the device loses power, as in even if the device is running on battery, but that is fine, irrespective of whichever options you choose. The point is, we are going to do a wipe from here, and when we do a wipe, not a retire, a wipe, the device is going to come back into the factory screen, the OOBE screen, and then the device will download the autopilot profile, and then the device now is going to be Azure AD joined. Hence the device is now transitioned from hybrid Azure AD joined to Azure AD joined. Now there are other things also that needs to be done after the device is enrolled, and those configuration needs to be done beforehand. I will talk about all of that later towards the end of this session. Right now I just wanted to explain the first methodology. Okay, all right, so we have understood the first methodology. Let's now go back to the diagram again. So we spoke about a device which is there in this state, if it needs to be cloud native, and if you do not want to use config manager in those devices, then this is the approach that I just spoke about. Now let us say that you want to go cloud native, but you still want to have your devices co-managed. That is, you don't want to remove the dependency from SCCM just yet, because let's say you have some very typical reporting use case which Intune is not meeting at this point of time. So how do you go from hybrid Azure AD joined to Azure AD joined cloud native for a Windows device using autopilot if you want to continue using the SCCM client, using a config manager? That is, if you want to continue having the device co-managed. Okay, so firstly, let's read about this first and let's understand a little bit of theory. So we obviously, as I said, we encourage our customers to go with cloud only approach to reduce the total cost of ownership. However, if you want to utilize your existing investment in your config in the on-premise that you have, and you want to continue using SCCM, then you can get your devices as cloud native and co-managed. Okay. And how do we do that? We are going to take a look over that right now. For this, what you need to have is something called a CMG or a cloud management gateway. Why is this needed? I'm going to explain that in a while. But here is the concept. Let us say that you have this device which is hybrid Azure AD joined. Okay. So I want this device to be now Azure AD joined or cloud native, and it should have the SCCM client also. Okay, therefore the device will be co-managed. So first I will have to deploy this SCCM client to the device from Intune after the device is co-piloted. So that is one thing that we have to do. Second, after this device gets the SCCM client, your SCCM client is going to talk with your SCCM server to fetch the policies. Your SCCM server is in your on-premise. So how will a device which is there in the internet talk to the SCCM server in your on-premise from the internet? There has to be a man in the middle, right? Cloud management gateway is that man in the middle. So again, I don't want to go into very details of cloud management gateway. It's a component of SCCM, but think of it this way. Let's say that you have a device which is there in the internet and you have your SCCM infrastructure in the intranet, and you want to deploy a policy to that device which can be there anywhere in the internet. Then there has to be a man in the middle, which is the cloud management gateway. And think of it like a gateway via which SCCM is sending the policies to the device. So this is, let's say, your SCCM server in your on-premise. This is your device which is there in the internet. So there will be a man in the middle called CMG, and the device will reach out to the SCCM server via the CMG. Okay, so this is a gateway. So there are two things that we have established. In this scenario, that is an option 2. What is option 2? Option 2 is wherein we want to autopilot a device which was initially config manager managed or group policy managed and enrolled to Intune and hybrid Azure AD joined. If we want to autopilot them and get them to cloud native, but continue using config manager and in the end device after it has been cloud natively deployed, and continue to have that device managed as co-management, then in that device there are two things that we need to configure. First is CMG, because that device after it is cloud native, it is no longer joined to the on-premise domain, it is joined to Azure, it is connected to the internet. So how will a device in the internet talk to the SCCM server? Because the device is co-managed, it is going to do that via CMG. Therefore CMG setup needs to be done by us. Second is, this device is Azure AD joined, Intune enrolled, and it has the SCCM client in it, right? Where is the device going to get the SCCM client from? It needs to be deployed by Intune. Therefore this SCCM client deployment is something that we need to do. That is something that we are going to look at. So now, how do we deploy this SCCM client? There are two ways of deploying this SCCM client. The SCCM client can be deployed automatically. We are going to see that automatic approach in a while. Or you can deploy that as a Win32 app, or you can deploy that as a MSI. What I mean by that is, automatically we are going to see what that automatic approach is. It's there embedded in the Intune portal. It wasn't there before, it has been added now, so that you don't have to do the step two, so that you don't have to do this or this. But let us say you want to do this or this, then all you have to do is take the SCCM client, use the Intune WinApp utility, convert it into Win32, and then deploy it to the devices. And when you're deploying, the command line for installation has to be correct. Or you can deploy it as a LOB app, that is, you can just upload the MSI to the Intune portal and it is going to come down to the device. Okay, now let's take a look over the portal. So in the Intune portal, when you go into under Windows, under enrollment, there is something called co-management settings. And when you click on that co-management settings, there is this option which says automatically install configuration manager agent, and it contains the command line as well. You just have to set this to yes. This is just a toggle. You need to set this to yes, and this setting needs to be deployed. What this does is, whenever this setting is, let's say, deployed to a device, that device is automatically going to get the SCCM client. And when it gets the SCCM client, the installation command is going to be over here, and the installation command and everything needs to be correct. The device will reach out to the CMG, and via the CMG, the device will reach out to your on-premise SCCM server. But just by this toggle, if you just set this toggle, Intune service will automatically deploy the latest version of SCCM client to the device. Meaning, you no longer need to take the SCCM client, package it, and then deploy it manually. Now, is this the only way of deploying a SCCM client to a device enrolled to Intune? No, it isn't. You can also get the MSI, as I said, convert it into Win32 app using Intune WinApp utility, and then deploy it to the devices. So now coming back to the theory section here, it's over here it says that we can achieve the installation of SCCM client in the devices which are autopiloted automatically by setting the automatically install configuration manager agent. That is option 1. It is talking about this option, automatically install the configuration manager agent. This will automatically install the configuration manager agent and use the CMG. If we don't want to use that, we can deploy it via Win32 app or a LP. Okay, all right. So we are back into the portal here, and let's take a look over those settings. So I'm back into enrollment, and over here I'm going to go into co-management settings. And over here, there you see, it says that automatically install configuration manager agent. I am going to set this to yes. And then we have our official documentation which talks about what option needs to be populated over here, the command line that needs to be used. As I had shown you in the documentation, we have to use the, as I had shown in the deck over here, the command line is documented. All we have to do is use the command line over here. This is going to use it, the command line is going to be used for installation as well as pointing the SCCM client to the right direction. And then there is this advanced settings which lets you decide after the SCCM client is installed and the device is co-managed, the workload is going to be by default set to Intune or by default set to SCCM. But the point here is, this is one way of deploying the SCCM client to the devices from Intune automatically without needing to package the SCCM installer. Now I'm at the documentation over here, and this is a documentation of SCCM. Over here you can see the config mgr node, and over here it tells you how what are the various ways by which you can deploy a SCCM client to a device, right? One of the methodology is by using Intune, and then how do you deploy it from Intune? One option you can see is you can get the MSI and you can deploy that MSI as a LOB application, and then this is going to be the command line parameter. So this command line parameter, obviously we'll have to test that command line parameter manually before we are entering it over here. But the point here is, this is a automatic way of deploying the SCCM client. Now what other ways do I have? The second option I have is, if I go into apps, if I go into Windows, over here I have an option of adding an application. So I can click on add over here, and the app type can be Win32 app. So if the app type is Win32 app, I just have to click on select, and then I have to point it to a Intune Win format. So what I mean by that is, you are going to get the MSI, as this documentation says, you are going to get this MSI from this location, and then the MSI is going to be ccm setup.msi. You have to use the Intune WinApp utility tool which is going to convert this MSI to Intune Win format. And then you have to deploy, you have to upload it over here, and then you have to deploy it to the devices. That is second option, that is using Intune Win or Win32 application. There is one other option, that is using line of business application. For Windows, you can deploy a MSI file using this same. So all you have to do is select this option, select app package file, and then select the MSI over here. Using the Win32 app approach is better because it provides you more options as compared to using a MSI. But the point that I'm trying to make is, again, let's just paraphrase this option. If you want to autopilot a device, get it cloud native, and continue using config manager client in the device, then obviously you will have to deploy whatever you have done in this, you have to done in this also. You have to do in this also. What I mean by that is, you have to create a autopilot profile in this option also. And when you create that autopilot profile, you have to select that option also, which says convert all your targeted devices to, or register all your targeted devices with autopilot service, because currently your devices are hybrid Azure AD joined. The autopilot profile is only going to come down when the device gets registered with the autopilot service. So for the device to get registered with the autopilot service, either you will have to select that option in the autopilot profile, or you will have to go into each device and then you will have to extract the hardware hash. This is the option that I'm spoken about, right? Again, just highlighting this as many times as I can. So the point that I'm trying to make is, whatever is listed over here, this needs to be done in option 2 as well. What needs to be done additionally, what needs to be done in option 2 is, first CMG needs to be set up, and second, the SCCM client needs to be deployed to the device. Now, as I said, SCCM client can be deployed automatically using the co-management settings, which you see in your screen right now. If you don't want to use that, then you can just deploy it as a MSI, or you can deploy the SCCM client as a Win32 application, which is going to give you more options. Now, when do we use this approach? First is, if we have a strong dependency on config manager and all the workloads, or maybe some workloads are still managed by config MGR, then we can consider getting the device co-managed even after going cloud native. However, our North Star should be getting rid of SCCM. This can only be in the interim. Using SCCM means you still have on-premise dependency, which means even though you have moved your device from on-prem to cloud native, still the device has dependency on your SCCM server. So you have not fully eliminated the need of on-premise. Okay. That is what exactly the second point is also saying. Our aim should be trying to remove our on-premise dependency for client management in the longer run. However, in the interim, we can have our cloud native devices co-managed as well if we really want to. Okay. All right. So we have understood option 1, that is autopiloting a device and getting it to cloud native. This is talking about a device which is hybrid Azure AD joined, enrolled to Intune via group policy or via SCCM. The second option was same use case, but after going cloud native, I want to deploy SCCM client as well, and I want to keep using SCCM client and getting the device co-managed even after going cloud native. Now let's see what is the third option. The third option is using something called OSD in config MGR. Again, not a big fan of this approach, because if you are using OSD in config MGR, it means you still have dependency on SCCM. So both these options, I'm not a big fan of them, but still I want to make sure this tutorial is giving you or listing out all the technically supported and possible options so that you can choose the best one. So as I said, the third option is using OSD in config manager. So you can use OSD, operating system deployment feature, in config manager, and what you'll have to use is you'll have to create a task sequence in config manager, and using that task sequence you can reimage a device and use autopilot user driven mode, and then get the device Entra ID joined and co-managed. What you'll have to do in this case is you will have to go to the Intune portal, you will have to export, you will have to create a autopilot profile, After you create that, you will have to export that JSON, add that JSON into your config manager console, and then use that in task sequencing. So this is our official documentation which talks about the same thing. You can look up this documentation as well. It says how you can do Windows autopilot deployment for existing devices using task sequence in config manager. So what this is going to do is this approach talks about it's going to wipe the device and then install a fresh copy of Windows in the device, and then it copies the autopilot JSON profile to the device. Okay, so again, you can just go through this documentation. All this does is it is creating a task sequence, it's installing the we are creating a task sequence, we are assigning that task sequence to a group of devices. The device is getting the operating system installed, it's getting the autopilot JSON, and then the device is undergoing autopilot. So yes, this would be our reference documentation. Again, as I said, this is a method available, but then should we really be using autopilot, task sequence in SCCM to do autopilot? Probably not. But then again, this is a methodology available as well. Let us say that you have a lot of desktops in your lab, and the use case is a lot of desktops in the lab, IT admin is present over there, and there is a lot of dependency on SCCM. So you can do a OSD as well and use this methodology. That is exactly what the next slide is going to talk about. When should we use this? If we have a strong dependency on SCCM leading to the device being co-managed, and a use case wherein we want the provisioning of the device to happen by the IT admin, then this methodology can be used. This method involves the overhead of manual IT intervention on each device. Okay, now coming back to our diagram. In the first option, we saw what are the ways of going cloud native if we want to make use of autopilot. Okay, now let us say that you have a customer who says, I cannot or I will not do autopilot. In that case, how do I go cloud native for my existing devices? The scenario 1.2, all the three options that we have in scenario 1.2 is addressing a use case wherein you want your devices are hybrid Azure AD joined, Intune enrolled, they were enrolled to Intune using group policy or SCCM, the devices were co-managed, you want to get the devices to cloud native, and you do not want to use autopilot. Okay, what options do we have? Let's take a look over all of them one by one. The first option is using something called provisioning package. Now, what is provisioning package? Microsoft has a tool called Windows Configuration Designer. That tool can be used to create something called a provisioning package. And that provisioning package can be used to enroll a device to Intune and do a Azure AD join, that is going cloud native. Okay, so if for some reason, and when do we use this? Most importantly, when would we, obviously you can see there is an overhead here, right? There has to be a provisioning package which needs to be created. Obviously, if you're creating a package, it will have a time to live. It's not like it's going to be there forever, which means that you have to maintain that package. You have to create a new package when the old one goes out. And if a package is created, somebody has to keep a track of that package, make sure that the package is not going into the wrong hands, right? So much of overhead. So when should we use this methodology? I'll come to that later, but obviously when we cannot use Windows Autopilot. And when can we not use Windows Autopilot? There is no additional licensing that you need for Windows Autopilot, but there are endpoints for Windows Autopilot, right? You would have seen the prerequisite documentation that we have for Windows Autopilot. Let us say that those prerequisites are not met. The end user is there behind a network wherein the autopilot URLs are not open. How do you go cloud native in those devices? Well, in those devices, this can be an option. For some reasons, if we don't want to use Windows Autopilot, want IT admin to do the enrollment and provisioning of the devices, then we can follow this approach. We would first have to create a provisioning package using Windows Configuration Designer, which will get the device Azure AD joined and Intune enrolled. While creating a package, we must provide the bulk BPRT, which is going to do the Azure AD join. And we just need to go to the Intune portal and do a wipe. See, wiping of the device, this is mandatory. There is no work around from wiping of the devices, because right now our device is hybrid Azure AD joined, right? You cannot just apply a package to a hybrid Azure AD joined device and convert it to Azure AD joined. The device needs to be disjoined, and then, well, there is a way of applying a package even without doing a wipe, but that is not what I would recommend over here. We need to do a wipe of the device. After we do a wipe, the device is again going to come to the OOBE screen. At that point, you have two options, either going with autopilot, but since we are not going with autopilot, the second option over here is using the PPKG. The package will be installed and we would do a Entra ID join of the device and Intune enrollment. Let's take a look over the screenshots and then we'll switch to the portal. This is a screenshot of how Windows Configuration Designer looks like. It is nothing but just a tool. Over here you have you can use Windows Configuration Designer to join a device to the on-premise directory also. Right now we are using Windows Configuration Designer to enroll the device to Azure AD, and then the device is going to be enrolled to Intune as well, because automatic enrollment is set in the MDM scope. So, and then obviously the admin has to provide his credentials, because, well, obviously authentication has to happen at some point of time, right? So yes, you click on over here, the admin provides his credentials, and then you create the output of this is you get something called a PPKG. PPKG is nothing but, think of it just like a package or a script, if you would call it, for the lack of a better term, and that script is going to do a Azure AD join and enrollment of the device. Now on the bottom you see it's a fresh device. You have just done a wipe of the device, therefore it has come back to the OOBE screen. All I have to do is click on next and then insert a USB pen drive into the device which contains this package. The operating system is going to identify that there is a provisioning package which is present in the USB. You'll have an option of clicking on this which says install, and then it is going to automatically install the provisioning package. What is the provisioning package going to do? The provisioning package in some sense is going to do the same thing which autopilot was doing over here. That is, it is going to get the device Azure AD joined and Intune enrolled. Okay, I've already done a dedicated video on how to enroll a device using provisioning package. I'm just going to refer to that very quickly over here. And over here you can see I have got my virtual machine set up, and in my virtual machine I've created a package and I have converted it to an ISO and I have mounted it and all of that. If you have a physical machine, you don't have to go through all of that hassle. All you have to do is create a provisioning package, put it in the pen drive, and then when the device is at the OOBE screen, as you can see over here, you have to insert the pen drive and then you will see this option which says that install provisioning package. You have to click on that, click on continue, and then that package is going to be installed automatically in the device. What is that package going to do? As I said, that package is going to do a Azure AD join of the device and then enroll the device to Intune. You have an option of doing more customizations also, not really necessary for the scope of this tutorial, but this is what the provisioning package is going to do. So as we can see, the provisioning package gets applied. Everything that is there in the provisioning package gets applied as well. Over here you can see that enroll in Azure Active Directory, that is done, meaning the device is Azure AD joined. After Azure AD joined, MDM scope is set, therefore it's going to be Intune enrolled as well. If you have any scripts or if you have created a local admin account, or there are other things also that you can do that you can put in the package, not really relevant right now, but the point that I'm trying to make over here is the package is going to apply, and then as you can see, the package was applied, and now we have an option of logging into the device using our Azure credentials, meaning the device is Azure AD joined and it has followed the naming convention that I had in the package. The device is now cloud native. a user got created as well. That is what I'm trying to show over here. A user got created because that was a part of the package, and we have an option of logging out and signing in using a local user as well. Okay, so this is the Windows Configuration Designer tool. It's a free tool available in the store. You can download it from there, and this tool can be used to create the package. All you have to do is launch this tool and click on Provision Desktop Devices. You can just name the package anything, just click on Finish, and then it's going to create a project for you. Now over here, you have an option of doing a lot of things. You can you can put in a device naming convention. You can enter a product key which is going to activate the operating system and stuff like that. If I click on next, you can set up an SSID using which the device will automatically connect to the Wi-Fi. If I click on next, this is the main thing. Using this package, the device, we want the device to enroll into Azure AD. Okay, but that is not necessary. The package can be used for other, this package can be used for, it's a multi-purpose package. You think of it like a script. Now using this script, we are right now doing a Azure AD join. But does that mean that using this script we cannot do anything else? Obviously we can do whatever we want using this script, right? Okay, so we have to select this option which says enroll in Azure AD, and then the Azure admin has to provide his credentials over here, which is what I'm going to do. You can see it tried to retrieve and it has fetched the bulk token successfully. And this token is going to be there in that package. And whenever we run that package in any device, that package is going to use this token to do Azure AD join. You can create a local admin account as well if you want. If you click on next, you have an option of adding any application to the package, so that when that package runs, along with doing Azure AD join, it's going to install that application as well. You have an option on the left hand side. You can see there's something called switch to advanced editor. You can go over there and then it opens an advanced editor which gives you even more options. So on the left hand side, you see it says available customizations. So everything that you see on the left hand side are things that you can customize and add to your package. And whenever you do anything and you add, it comes on the right hand side under selected customizations. Like for example, right now I have added the BPRT. So that is what that BPRT is showing up over here under accounts and Azure. That BPRT which we selected in the other UI or the interface, it is showing up over here. But over here you can see you have an option of adding a lot of things in the package. Okay, I don't want to overcomplicate it, so I'm just going to remove the Windows Configuration Designer and the relevant windows from in front of you. I just want to summarize this and paraphrase this by saying that if you want to, let's bring back our diagram and then just paraphrase. If you have a device which is on-premise domain joined, Intune enrolled, maybe group policy managed or co-managed, and you want to go to cloud native and you do not want to use autopilot, then one option that you have is using something called provisioning package. As we just saw, the provisioning package has to be created using a tool called Windows Configuration Designer, which is a free tool available in the store. Using that tool, we create a PPKG. That PPKG needs to be applied to a device which has just undergone factory reset, meaning you will still have to take your device which is currently Hybrid Azure AD join and do a wipe of that device and then apply that package. That package is going to do what autopilot was doing in the previous case. That is, it is going to Azure AD join the device, Intune enroll the device, and whatever other customizations you might have in your package, it is going to apply all of that to the device as well. Okay, when should we use this? We have already seen all the screenshots. When should we use this? This is also a very efficient method of enrolling a device in cases where autopilot cannot be used for network related reasons, like if you cannot use the URLs or the ports that are needed. Like for example, I'm bringing up the Windows Autopilot documentation in front of you, and if you scroll down, these are the prerequisites or these are the requirements for Windows Autopilot. From a software standpoint, the Windows versions needs to be all these. If you look at the networking tab, it talks about all the URLs and the ports that needs to be open. So you need to make sure all those URLs and ports and endpoints are accessible for Windows Autopilot to work. Now let us say that in your use case, it's a government organization or it's a bank or it's a closed network, and the organization does not want you to open the access to those URLs. How do you do a Azure AD join of the device? In that case, provisioning package is a very viable approach. We have to keep in mind that using provisioning package requires IT intervention, because that you won't give that provisioning package to the end user. That provisioning package or an image is going to always be there with the IT admin, which means that IT admin will go to the device and he'll have to plug in the USB, which is going to enroll the device to and do Azure AD join. Meaning, if you are using this, keep in mind that somebody has to plug in the USB and IT intervention is required. The provisioning of the device is fast as the PPKG is installed during the out-of-the-box phase. So as we saw, the provisioning is very fast. This method of provisioning is ideal when you want the device to be set up by the IT admin, and then the IT admin is going to hand over the device. If the end user is going to do the enrollment, then this methodology is not really great. If the IT admin is going to do the enrollment on behalf of the user, then this method of enrollment can be used. And obviously this goes without saying, make sure the user has backed up the data in OneDrive or earlier, because as expected earlier in this session, it is going to, we are going to initiate a wipe, and when we initiate a wipe, the user's data is going to be gone. So what are the steps that we have to follow if we want to go with this approach? Step number 1, go to Windows Configuration Designer, create a package. Step number 2, copy that package to a USB. Step number 3, go to the Intune portal, click on the device which is currently hybrid Azure AD joined and Intune enrolled, and do a wipe. Step number 4, go to the device will be now at the UUB screen, insert the pen drive. The operating system is going to automatically detect the pen drive and the PPKG in that pen drive. It is going to install that PPKG. The device is now going to be automatically Azure AD joined and Intune enrolled. Hence, it's going to be cloud native. So these are the steps that we have to follow, and obviously goes without saying, backing up of users' data. That's very important. Okay, now let's take a look over the next one. We have seen PPKG. What other options do we have? Let us say that I have got only one device. I'm just giving you an example. I have only one device which is currently hybrid Azure AD joined, and I want to transition that one device to cloud native. Okay, well, obviously for that one device I can create an autopilot profile. But what if I cannot create an autopilot profile because in my network the endpoints are not open? Well, then I'll have to create a package. But it's just one device. Do I really need to invest that time in creating a provisioning package for that one device? Obviously, maybe not. So for testing purpose, if you have just one device, again in production, nobody will be using this, but you can also do a Azure AD join and Intune enrollment of a device manually or by using the company portal application. That is what this method is talking about. How do you do that? Let's say that I have a device. The device is hybrid Azure AD joined, Intune enrolled, let's say managed via group policy or co-managed SCCM, whatever. Now I want to go cloud native in that device. I cannot use autopilot and I cannot use provisioning package for whatever reasons. All I have to do is go to the Intune portal, do a wipe of that device. When the wipe of that device happens, the device is going to come back to the UUB screen. Now you just have to do a next finish, and then you can go into the settings and you can go into access work or school, connect, and then you will have an option which says join this device to Azure Active Directory. When you click on that, you enter your username, password, the device gets Azure AD joined, Intune enrolled, meaning the device is going to be cloud native. Or if you don't want to go to the desktop screen, in the initial screen itself, you have an option of doing a Azure AD join if you enter the credentials over here. What I'm trying to signify using this option is, if you don't have provisioning package, if you don't have, and we already know this option, right? Going to connect, access work or school, join this device to Azure Active Directory. The reason why we don't use this option that much is because if I've got 10,000 devices, I cannot go into start settings, connect, and then do this 10,000 times, right? That is why we are using something like autopilot or something like provisioning package, so that the number of clicks is reduced. But if you have just one device, then for the sake of it, I wanted to say that this option also exists. Don't want to spend too much of time in this option, but yes, manually enrolling the device can be used in scenarios wherein we don't have the IT admin to create the package. We don't have an IT admin to create a profile. We don't have an IT admin to create an autopilot profile, or if the autopilot URLs are not whitelisted. This process is time taking as it needs to be repeated in each device one by one manually, hence it is not scalable. This method is ideal if we just need to enroll a couple of devices for our testing purpose in our lab. Okay, and well, this is a personal method of enrollment, therefore there is some tweaking that you might have to do in enrollment restrictions. But the point that I'm trying to make is, I hope by this methodology we have understood that if you just want to go cloud native on just one device in your lab, this is how you do it. Okay, all right. So we have seen provisioning package, we have seen manual or company portal options. What other option do we have? The next option is, well, obviously reimaging the device. Reimaging the device meaning, let's say you want to reinstall the operating system, and this is in line with what we had initially seen as Microsoft recommended approach. The use case is, I have a device which is Windows 10. It is hybrid Azure AD joined, managed via group policy. I want to transition this device to cloud native. So one option is, I can do all that I have spoken about until now. The other option is, I reimage that device with a new image of Windows 11. And when I'm doing the reimaging of the device, as a part of reimage in the UB screen itself, the device can be joined to Azure AD directly. Okay, all right. So let's look at the theory. User always have this option of reimaging the device and starting fresh while transitioning to cloud native. This option is usually can be used if you want to upgrade from Windows 10 to Windows 11 and we don't want to go via autopilot way or provisioning package way or manual enrollment way. Once the device is reimaged, it will be removed from the on-premise domain, and once the device is reimaged, the device can then be joined to Entra and Intune in the out of the box itself. This method is most intrusive and takes a lot of time because a fresh operating system is installed. This method requires a lot of IT admin intervention, and it can be chosen when the operating system upgrade is there in the picture as well. Okay, so our next use case is transitioning devices from hybrid Azure AD joined to cloud native, which were already autopiloted. So let's take a look over the diagram here again. So we are here wherein let's say that I have a device which is hybrid Azure AD joined and managed via Intune. But in this case, the hybrid Azure AD join of the device did not happen by using the Azure AD Connect tool. This time, the hybrid Azure AD join autopilot happened using an autopilot profile. Well, even if you use an autopilot profile, later on the object is going to be synced using Azure AD Connect tool only. But the point that I'm trying to make is the use case 2 talks about if you had deployed an hybrid Azure AD join autopilot profile to the device, and now you want to switch that device to cloud native. What options do you have? And this is the easiest way, or this is the easiest use case or scenario that we have. So let me quickly go to the portal. The scenario that I'm talking about is going into the autopilot profile, and right now let's say that there is a hybrid Azure AD join autopilot profile that is created, and let's say this is applied to 1000 devices or 10,000 devices or what have you. Okay, so we'll go to the properties. We will click on edit. Let's say that this is the setting, and The setting that I want to highlight over here is, over here you can see that join to Microsoft Entra ID as Microsoft Entra Hybrid joined. Okay, so the device is currently Hybrid Azure AD joined. So let's say that this is the profile that was used to set up the device. Now I want to convert this device to cloud native. What do I do? Well, this is the easiest way, because since you had already deployed Autopilot profile to these devices, it means that these devices are already registered with the Autopilot service. So now all I have to do is create a new Autopilot profile, and in that Autopilot profile, instead of Microsoft Entra Hybrid join, I am going to select Microsoft Entra ID joined. Therefore, the device will no longer be Hybrid Azure AD joined, and target that to the device. So all you have to do is go to the old profile, go to the assignments of the old profile, and if the old Hybrid Azure AD join Autopilot profile is assigned to any device group, you just need to delete that device from here. And once that is done, you just need to close this, and you need to create a new Autopilot profile. And in the new Autopilot profile which you will create, you no longer have to select this option which says that convert all targeted devices to Autopilot. That is no longer needed, because the device is already registered with the Autopilot, the devices that we are talking about right now. You just have to make sure that this option is created. So all that we are doing is, there was an old profile, it had this option selected. All we have done is we have removed the assignment of that old profile. Now we have created a new Autopilot profile, and that new Autopilot profile we are selecting Microsoft Entra joined, and then we are just going to do a Autopilot reset or a wipe of the device. The device is going to come back to the OOB screen, and now the device is going to download the second Autopilot or the new Autopilot profile, because that is the one that is assigned, and the older Autopilot profile which was doing a Microsoft Entra Hybrid join is no longer deployed. Okay, so that is not going to come up. That is exactly what this use case is talking about, wherein we are migrating a device which is Hybrid Azure AD joined, and it was provisioned using Hybrid Azure AD join Autopilot. We are migrating or transitioning that device to cloud native by using Autopilot, and all that we have to do is we have to create a new Autopilot profile, and in that new Autopilot profile all we have to do is we have to select the first option, that is Microsoft Entra joined. Okay, that is exactly what this option is talking about. So let's take a look over the theoretical part for this option. If we had provisioned our existing device using Autopilot as Entra Hybrid join, then the devices would already be registered with the Autopilot service, right? So to move them with cloud native, we just need to create a new Autopilot profile with Entra ID join, and for the new Autopilot profile to take effect, we would have to do a reset of the device, and obviously you would have to unassign the device from the older Autopilot profile and assign that device to the newer Autopilot profile. Okay, and in this case we no longer need a offline domain join connector and all that setup which was needed if we wanted to do an Hybrid Azure AD join Autopilot. Okay, tip: when should we use this? This is the easiest and the fastest option if we wish to move our existing devices which were previously provisioned using Autopilot to cloud native. By using this option, we don't need to recall the devices back to the IT. I mean, there is no IT intervention needed, right? So you just go to the portal, you just create a new Autopilot profile, unassign the older one, and then you just deploy the new Autopilot profile to the same group, and you just go to the portal and do a wipe of the device. The device automatically goes through the OOB screen and downloads the new profile. Okay, all right. And this is the screenshot which is talking about the join to Microsoft Entra ID, as this is the only option that needs to be selected over here, and this needs to be assigned to the device group. Okay, all right. So now let's do again a quick summary or a recap of things that we have discussed until now. What we have discussed is This is our North Star, or this is where we want to get to. That is, we need to get to cloud native. What is cloud native? Cloud native is a device which is Azure AD joined and Intune enrolled. Now, if we want to get to cloud native, possibly we are either here or we are here. If we are here, that is, our devices are hybrid Azure AD joined, Intune enrolled and managed via GPO or config manager, then we can get to this state by either using this of the options in scenario 1.1 or 1.2. Meaning, if you want to get to cloud native from this state and you're fine using autopilot and you do not want config manager, you don't want your end devices to be co-managed anymore, then you have to choose option 1, which we have already discussed how to do that. If you want to get your end devices co-managed as well as have cloud native, then you need to choose option 2, which is similar to option 1, but in additional you have to set up CMG and you have to deploy the config manager client as the automatic setting or as a Win32 app or as a MSI. Or the third option is you can use OSD in config manager, wherein you create an autopilot profile in the Intune portal, you get its JSON and then you add that JSON into the task sequence, which is then used to provision the device. Now let us say that you are here but you cannot use autopilot. Then your options are, you can use a provisioning package. We saw we can create provisioning package using Windows Configuration Designer. IT admin intervention is needed for this. And you just need to plug in the USB drive which is containing the PPKG at the out of the box screen and you're good to go. Or you can do a manual or company portal enrollment wherein you go into start settings, access, work or school, and you click on connect and then you click on Azure AD join and then it's going to do Azure AD join into enrollment. Or you can download the company portal application and use that, or you can reimage the device. All these options that you are seeing from top to bottom, all these require a wipe of the device. You cannot get from this state to this state without doing a wipe. Okay, that is what we need to keep in mind. And then lastly, we saw use case 2 wherein our devices were already provisioned using autopilot, but in this case we had used the hybrid Azure AD join autopilot profile. And now, since we want to move to cloud native, all we have to do is unassign the device from the previous autopilot profile, create a new autopilot profile with Azure AD join option, and then just reset the device so that it gets the newer profile. And again, resetting. So I have mentioned using other methodologies. Other methodologies always means reimaging the operating system or installing a fresh operating system or anything like that, right? So that is always available. Okay, before we move forward, what is the crux of what we have discussed until now? The crux is Microsoft recommendation is to provision new devices as cloud native using Entra ID join autopilot. So if you are provisioning new device, provision it using Entra ID join autopilot. For the existing device, you remove it as a part of your device refresh cycle. This is what Microsoft recommends. However, you have got a lot of options that we just saw, which you can use if you don't want to wait till the device refresh cycle and if you want to just get rid of your on-premise dependency right now, because we don't know when the device refresh is going to happen. If it might happen after 5 years, 10 years, right? Why should we keep our on-premise running for 5 years or 10 years just for the sake of it, right? So if you wish to go ahead with one of the approaches, all the approaches that I have listed in this tutorial are Microsoft supported, then there are some factors that you need to keep in mind on the basis of which you are going to select the approach which suits you best. First is availability of IT admins to provision devices. If you have IT admins to provision devices, then you can use options like using OSD with autopilot or using provisioning package or re-imaging the device. If you don't have IT admins at the end user location, then obviously you cannot use any of those options. Meaning if IT admin is not present at the end user location, then you cannot use this option, you cannot use this option, you cannot use this option, right? Rest of the options does not need direct intervention of IT admin at the end user location. Okay. If we wish to ship devices directly to the end users without IT admin intervention or not. If we wish to do that, then you can use, if we are ready to ship the devices directly to the end user, then you can easily use autopilot, right? Because autopilot is going to work over the internet. So then you can use this option, you can use this option, you can use this option as well, you can use this option as well, if directly shipping the device to the end user is a possibility. Then next determination criteria. If we want to persist with on-premise, that is config manager, or if we don't want to persist with on-premise config manager. Well, Microsoft suggests not to continue with on-premise config manager unless and until there is some very typical use case which you're not able to achieve via Intune. So let's say that you want to go ahead with on-premise config manager, then your options are this one, and pretty much these two, right? Or you can target a new Entra ID, join autopilot profile, and then you can go back to this one. Okay, so sorry, this one. Okay, all right. So again, whether you want to have SCCM client in your device or not after the device goes cloud native is also a factor that we need to keep in mind. And finally, network bandwidth availability and URLs needed for the client. Like for example, if you want to autopilot the device, so everything that is coming under this section, you need to whitelist the autopilot URLs. Only after that, and the device needs to be registered with the autopilot service. Only after that you can use the options 1 to 3. Otherwise, you have to look for alternatives. So maybe these factors could be guidelines that we should keep in mind. And while we are using these guidelines, on the basis of the guidelines or the factors that I just discussed, we can decide from option 1 to option 7 which one is actually meeting our use case. So that was the first half of this tutorial. Now, keeping all this in mind, there is one other thing that I wanted to just list out. I'm not going to discuss that very much in detail, but if you guys remember, I had said that whenever we are following any of the approaches in the previous slide, we need to do a wipe of the device. However, there is a third-party tool called Quest, and they claim that using this tool, you can do a migration of devices which are hybrid Azure AD joined to cloud native, that is Entra ID, without reimaging and rebuilding profiles. So apparently it is a tool which lets you do the migration, and you don't need to follow the option 1 to option 7. Think of it like a tool which will do its magic, and it will migrate the devices from on-prem to Azure directly. Now, does Microsoft recommend using such third-party tools? Not exactly. I haven't used this tool before. I don't know what is the success ratio of such tools, and there is always this chance that after you do this migration, if there is something that goes wrong in that device which was migrated using this methodology, that is using this third-party tool, and then if you raise a case with Microsoft support, they might come back to you and say that, well, you have not followed a Microsoft recommended approach, therefore you will have to join the device back to Azure again, as it disjoin and rejoin again. Therefore, if you have a lot of devices, if you have a customer who wants to migrate from on-prem to cloud in production, then think with caution before using any third-party tools. Also, this is a paid tool, this is not free. I don't have any customer who is exactly using this tool, but I just wanted to call it out over here that there are third-party tools in the market who claim that they can do this migration from hybrid Azure AD join to cloud native of a Windows device without needing to do a data wipe. However, not really recommended by Microsoft. Neither would I recommend using any tools like this. Okay. All right. So now let's see what's the next thing that we need to speak about. We have until now spoken about why cloud native is needed and the different approaches for going from hybrid Azure AD join to cloud native depending upon our use case and scenarios. But is that all that we need to think about? Well, the answer is no. That is just, let's say, 40% of the work. The rest 60% of the work is the other considerations. I'm referring to them as the aftermath, but we need to think about this even before we transition our devices from hybrid Azure AD join to Azure AD join. First is the applications. What I mean by that is when our devices were hybrid Azure AD joined, then the devices were joined to the on-premise domain. So the devices were easily able to access the applications that were there in the on-premise. Now our devices are becoming cloud native. How are our devices going to access the applications which are there in the on-premise? Should we also not talk about migrating those applications and the application server from on-premise to Azure? That should also be a talking point, right? That is one, which is what we are going to discuss next. Second is policies. When the devices were hybrid Azure AD joined, it's possible that at that point of time there were policies coming down to the device from Intune, but maybe there were policies coming down to the device from GPO as well. All those policies will no longer be applicable because now the devices is cloud native. The devices is no longer connected to the on-premise domain. Therefore, those GPOs will no longer work. So we have to talk about how to migrate those GPOs as well from the on-premise to cloud. And finally, the user's data. As I have said so many times, the approaches that we discussed, in all those approaches, we are going to do a wipe of the device, right? So since we are going to do a wipe of the device, the user data will be gone. So as I said, we need to configure known folder move or something like that in OneDrive, or tell the user to take backup of their data so that after the reset, the data is still recoverable and stuff like that. So all those things needs to be discussed as well. So now we are going to focus on all these three things one by one. First, we are going to talk about applications. So we need to talk about migrating the applications from two perspectives. First is migrating the hosting of the application, and second is migrating the delivery of the application. What do I mean by these 2 points? The first point is the hosting of the application. So let's say that our devices were hybrid Azure AD joined, and at that point of, when I say hybrid Azure AD joined, the devices were there in the on-premise. So the devices were able to access the other applications which were there in your other application servers in your on-premise. Now, since we have gone with cloud native, our devices are now Azure AD joined only. We also need to think about migrating your application servers from your on-premise to Azure. That is what is coming under migrating the hosting of the application. And then the second point is migrating the delivery of application. So let's say that initially we were delivering the applications to the devices by some methodology, right? Some on-premise methodology. Now that methodology needs to be changed from that on-premise methodology to cloud methodology, which in this case is Intune. So these are the two things that we are going to talk about first. So first, let's talk about migrating the hosting of the application. So now what matters is what kind of applications do we have. Let's say that in our on-premise, I have an application server which is running with an application, an on-premise application. Now first we need to identify what kind of application is it. Is it an application which is developed in .NET framework, or is it like a web application? We need to find out what category of application it is. Let's say, for example, it's an application which is developed in .NET framework. Then I found out that this is just a website that I found, and over here it is talking about how you can migrate your applications which are developed in .NET from your on-premise to Azure. I'm not going to go into very details of this. I just wanted you guys to know that documentation on this exists, which we can refer to. But the point is, just migrating the devices is not enough for you to get rid of your on-premise infrastructure. You need to think about applications as well. So the first category of application could be .NET. What else? What other category of applications do we have? As I said, let's say that I have an application which is a web app. So now that web application needs to be migrated from the hosting of that web application needs to be migrated from your on-premise to cloud. Now I found this third-party blog which talks about the various things that you need to do in order to migrate your on-premise web application to Azure. And I mean, this is just an example for your reference. I'm sure there are many such articles out in the web. So what this is doing is, first it is setting up the infrastructure that is needed to host your web application. What is the infrastructure that is needed? You will have to create a virtual machine, which is going to host your web application. Before you can create the virtual machine, first you are creating a virtual network. Once that virtual network is created, now you're creating a storage account wherein everything is going to be stored. So over here you see there's a storage account that is created. You need an Azure subscription for all of this. And now you're creating a cloud service which is going to run for your application that you're creating. So the cloud service is created. Once you have created the virtual network, the cloud service, and all of that, now you're going to create an Azure virtual machine. So where it talks about creating an Azure virtual machine, which is a part of the same resource group. Once the Azure machine has been created, now that Azure virtual machine is going to host your web application. So you provide the Azure virtual machine the same network, you open the ports, you open the port 3389, which is for RDP, and then you take a RDP of that virtual machine, you create firewall rules to make sure that virtual machine is able to communicate with the application that you have just created in Azure. And there are some PowerShell scripts as well that you'll have to run in order to add the web server feature. I think you can do that from Server Manager also. Then you're installing the IIS role also. And I mean, there are a lot of configurations that we have to do. And again, as I said, this is one blog which talks about how to migrate your web applications which were originally hosted in your on-premise to Azure. I'm sure there are many other blogs, such third-party blogs out there. But the point that I'm trying to make here is, this is also one of the things that you need to think about. That is migrating the hosting of the application. Because in the on-premise world, the apps were all hosted in the application servers which were present in your on-premise infrastructure. Since we are getting rid of the on-premise infrastructure, we need to think about how we can migrate those applications to Azure also. Is this compulsory? Well, not exactly. Even if your devices are in your joined to Azure AD, even if your devices are cloud native, if you connect your device to the corporate network, your devices should still be able to access some of your corporate resources like your file server, your print server, and all of that. But the applications is something which, until and unless you migrate to Azure, you cannot remove your dependency from your on-premise. Okay. And then you also need to, so right now we have spoken about, if you have a .NET framework developed application, then there are tools available which can help you migrate. If you have got on-premise web application, we just saw one blog which talks about how that can be migrated. Now let's say that you have any legacy application which has on-premise dependency which cannot be migrated. That is something you need to evaluate and find out. So you need to get a list of all the applications that your organization or that your customer might be having in his on-premise setup, and then find out how many of those applications are of which type, and then figure out a plan on how to migrate those applications from your on-premise to Azure. Okay. All right. So we have already seen the .NET application migration, and then I found another third-party tool. This is ScienceSoft, and it is also talking about how you can migrate applications from your on-premise to Azure. It is talking about, in some cases, we just have to rehost. Like initially your application was hosted in on-prem, now it just needs to be hosted in Azure. So all you're doing is just migrating the application as is. In some cases, you're doing a refactor wherein you're introducing minor modifications. In some cases, you're doing a re-architecture of the entire application. And in some cases, you're building a new application right from scratch. Okay. So again, this is a third-party tool. I haven't really used it. If you have developers at your disposal, you might as well want them to build the application from scratch. But depending upon what is the most feasible thing, I just wanted you might as well choose the one that fits you the best. And I just wanted to make sure that I'm calling out that there are these third-party tools available as well, just like this one and the one we saw earlier, which can meet our purpose. Okay, so until now we have spoken about one criteria, that is migrating the hosting of application from on-premise to cloud. And the second is migrating the delivery of application. So let's say when you were in your on-premise, if your devices were hybrid Azure AD joined and enrolled to Intune, then most probably the delivery of that application was already happening from Intune. But just in case all the applications were not getting delivered to the device from Intune, I guess most of us are already aware about the delivery of applications in a Windows device from Intune. We already know the kind of applications we can deploy to a Windows device from Intune. We can deploy a MSI, and these three are the OS editions that we are going to talk about. Obviously, we won't be having Windows Home in our setup, in an enterprise setup. So as far as application type is concerned, we already know we can deploy a MSI from Intune, right? You have an option of going into the Intune portal and just uploading a MSI file. Or if you have a exe, we need to convert that exe into .intune win format by using the Intune Win app utility, and then you can deploy that from Intune. You have Office Click to run, you have Apex or MSIX, we have the new store which uses Winget. We have ability of deploying web apps, store links, Microsoft Edge, the entire Office suite. So, and we have an option of deploying scripts from Intune. We are already aware on the delivery of application, right? So this is pretty much straightforward, but I just wanted to call out that the hosting of the application, migrating the hosting of application from on-premise to Azure is something that we have to think about. Migrating the delivery of application from on-premise to Azure is also something that we have to think about while we transition the devices from hybrid Azure AD joined to cloud native. All right, the next thing we need to talk about is migrating the policies. So currently, as I said, our scenario is our devices are hybrid Azure AD joined, meaning the devices are joined to the on-premise domain, meaning the devices would be getting the on-premise group policies. But when we get those devices to cloud native, those devices are no longer going to get the group policies. So we need to figure out a way to migrate our group policies to Intune, which is what we are going to talk about right now. So I'm going to show you guys how we can migrate that, which is point number 2. But before we do that, there is something that is even more important to think about. And that is, I will not recommend migrating all the group policies that you have to Intune, because the group policies that you have, they were maybe created 10 years back, 15 years back, right? When you had your on-premise setup done. We need to evaluate whether all those policies are still even applicable in the modern world or not. That is the first thing that needs to be done. So the approach here should be going through all the group policies and finding out how many of those policies are still needed in a device which is cloud native. Let's say that you have got 100 on-premise group policies. When you evaluate that, I am sure you will find some settings which are no longer applicable on cloud native. At least you might find some settings. Let's say that obviously when you had your on-premise, you had Windows 10, right? Now we have Windows 11, which is now going cloud native. There would definitely be some settings which we were configuring via group policy, and now that setting is obsolete in case of Windows 11, which means that we no longer need to create a policy for that. Or maybe that policy is not needed in the cloud world. Maybe that policy exists. It's not obsolete, but it is not needed in the modern world. Therefore, I will very strongly suggest, don't just blindly follow step number 2. That is, get a list of all your group policies and then create equivalent Intune policies and then say that the migration is done or the failover has been done. That is not the right approach. We need to check each group policies and see the settings in each of them and figure out whether they are still relevant or not, whether they are still needed or not. And if they are needed, then we should follow the step number 2. The step number 2 here is how we can migrate the group policies from on-prem to cloud, which we actually need. And that is what I am going to show you guys. So before I do the demo of that, first I want to show you guys the documentation. So we have a methodology of migrating our group policies to Intune using settings catalog, and this is the public documentation. You will find a lot of third-party blogs with screenshots and all of that. I'll not go through all of that. I thought I would rather show it to you guys live, but it is what this is talking about. You just need to go to your on-premise domain controller, and when you go over there, you have an option of exporting your group policies. Like over here, you see you have an option of saving a report of your existing group policies. You save that in form of an XML, and then you go to the Intune portal, you upload that XML. Intune is going to do an evaluation and tell you that, okay, out of the 100 group policies that you have, let's say 60 or 70 of them can be addressed via Intune policies. Okay, which means that out of the 100 policies that you had to migrate, 60 or 70 can be migrated easily, and the Intune portal itself is going to create the relevant policies for you. What do we do with the remaining 30 or 40? That is the next step. That is step number 3. How do we fill that gap? But before we fill that gap, we first need to find out that out of the 100 policies that is there in the on-premise, how many of them can be created in Intune. So using this group policy analytics tool, Microsoft and Intune has made it easier for you. So you no longer have to open each group policy and then check into, like for example, let's say BitLocker. Let's say you were deploying a BitLocker policy to devices from your group policy. Now you need to migrate that policy to Intune. So one option is you check the configuration that you had in BitLocker, then you check Intune's documentation and see how exactly you can create a BitLocker policy, whether all the settings that were there related to BitLocker in GPO, whether all of them are there in Intune or not. That is one way, the manual way. However, using the group policy analytics tool, Microsoft Intune has made it easier for you because they are themselves going to analyze the XML which is containing all the group policies, and they are going to tell you how many of those policies can be created in Intune. So that is what we are going to do now. So this is my domain controller. I am going to log into that. Alright, there you go. I'm logged into my domain controller. Now all I have to do is I have to open the group policy editor. So here we go. I am going to expand my domain, and over here you can see there are a lot of policies created. There is this default domain policy, and then there is this group, there is this GPO that I have created manually. Let's say that you have got hundreds of them. You won't probably have hundreds of group policies. You will probably have few, and each group policy might have a lot of settings. Now, once you have evaluated that out of all the group policies that you have right now, you want to migrate, let's say, X number of them. All you have to do is right click on that group policy, click on save report, and then this is going to give you an option of saving that in an XML file. So all you have to do is click on this XML and then save it in the desktop. or wherever you would like. So I just saved this, and once we have saved this, all we have to do is we have to double click and open this. So I'm just double clicking and opening this XML, and this XML is nothing but it is just the metadata of the group policy that we have created. So this contains all the settings in that group policy. If I scroll down, I'll probably be able to see everything that was configured. Alright, first one over here, I believe this is related to BitLocker, which says allow enhanced PIN for startup. This one is related to BitLocker. This one is also related to BitLocker, which says configure use of hardware-based encryption for operating system drive. Then says BitLocker software-based encryptions. All these settings are enabled. The next one is restricting encryption algorithm. This one is set to disable. So all the settings that I have selected in the group policy, all of that is showing up in the, it shows up in the UI. It's going to show up in the XML as well. Require additional authentication at startup. This is also enabled. And then obviously when you make it in the UI, you get an explanation, right? So that same explanation is there in this XML as well. And then allow BitLocker without a compatible TPM is enabled. Settings for computer with a TPM. And if I scroll down, these were all related to BitLocker. And then allow use of camera is disabled. And then automatic MDM enrollment, which is a policy that we must be aware of if we have done enrollment of device, hybrid agility joint devices via group policy. This is also enabled. And then what else? I believe we have something for Windows Hello for Business, which is enabled. We have OneDrive, which is enabled. So automatic updates, which is enabled. So all these policies, and these are just a few examples. Let's say that you have got a lot of on-premise policies, group policies that you had. All you have to do is go to your domain controller and export that XML. Once you have exported that XML, your main work is done. Now all you have to do is go to the Intune portal. So I'm back into my Intune portal yet. We just have to scroll down and there is this section called Group Policy Analytics. We have to click over here and we will have an option of uploading our XML over here. So let me just delete the old ones and then we are going to take a look over the new one. Okay, so I've deleted the old one, I've deleted all of this, and now over here you see there is an option to import. And we are going to import the XML that we have got from our domain controller. That XML contains the group policies that were configured. So all I have to do is click on import and I'm going to click over here. It's going to give me an option to import. This is the XML that I downloaded from there. I'm just going to click on that and then click on open. Okay, the XML is going to be uploaded. I'm just going to click on next. I'm just going to apply any scope tag. So this scope tag will be applied to the policies that gets created. But right now I just don't want to overcomplicate it. Right now, just think of it like we got an XML, we are giving it to Intune and Intune is going to do some analysis for us. So I'm just going to do a next and then I'm going to do a create. So now it has been uploaded and it is generating a report for you. It takes a couple of minutes and then you will see the group policy migration readiness. What is supported, what is not supported. But just by looking at this, you can see that MDM support is 69%. We have got 20 items which are ready for migration, 10 items which are not supported and 1 item which is deprecated. A total of 31 items. I can delete this one also. I don't really need that one. Okay, it's going to run a report again. You might have multiple, right? Because you might have uploaded multiple XMLs over here, one for each group policy. So this is going to generate a report on the basis of all the XMLs that you would have uploaded. So right now I've uploaded only one XML and that one XML contains a lot of settings. Now let's understand all of this. First, it says MDM supports 69%. What we mean by that is out of 100%, 69% of the policies from GPOs can be migrated to Intune, and we will take a look over which all those are. Okay, and then if I click on this 69, I am going to get a complete list of all the settings that were configured. So we were looking at all of this in XML format. Now we are looking at all of that in the UI format. So all these settings that we see right now, all these settings were configured in the group policy, out of which there is one policy that you can see which is now deprecated. It was there in GPO, it is no longer there in Intune because this setting is deprecated by the operating system. But other than that, you can see everything that was there in the on-premise, like Windows Hello, OneDrive, TPM, BitLocker, all of that is over here. So, and then it even tells you what was the name of the setting, where in the group policy node that setting was created by us, whether that value was, whether when you create a group policy, you have an option of either enabling it or disabling it, right? So over here it shows whether it was enabled or disabled. If there is any numerical value that we had set up, it gives you information of that as well. It tells you whether the policy that we are creating has a device scope or user scope. It also even tells us what is the minimum operating system version needed for that policy. Okay. All right. And then it even tells you the CSP name, which CSP it is targeting and stuff like that. So this is one. By looking at this, we can now, let's say that there is this MDM support which shows no. Okay. What do we do with this? I am going to come to that later. First, I just want to show you guys the low hanging fruits and then we will complicate it more. So first step was downloading that XML from GPO. Second step was uploading that XML to the Intune portal. And then Intune is going to do the evaluation and tell you that out of the 10 group policies that you have created or 10 settings that you have in your group policy, how many of them are actually supported by Intune. Okay, let's close this and let's see what else do we have. It says unknown settings view. So if I click on view, it is going to give me a list of settings that we are not sure about. Right now there aren't any, but in some cases you might find some unknown settings over here as well. Alright, so this is the analysis that Intune is giving us. Intune is telling us, as per our XML, which setting in which component of GPO was configured, with which value, and what is the minimum operating system version needed, and which CSP is being targeted by that policy. Now, what do we do next? Then over here you see there is this option called migrate, and this is where things get automated. Now one option was, I look at this and I see that okay, there is an option, there is this policy which allows use of camera is disabled by that. Now I can go into the Intune portal and create a policy on my own, but I don't know where to go. Then I'm going to check the documentation. That's going to take a lot of time. Now the easier way of doing that is, and the automated way is, you just have to click on migrate over here. The moment you click on migrate, all the settings that we saw in that XML, they all show up over here. And now you have an option of clicking on select all on this page. If you want to create a Intune policy corresponding to each of the component which we have just identified from the XML. Now obviously you see that whichever does not have a MDM support, that is not selected by itself. You don't have an option of selecting that. Like these, the MDM selected is showing up as no. Now we'll come to that later on how to address those gaps. But right now what I'm trying to highlight is, if you just select all on this page, everything that was configured via GPO which is supported in Intune is going to be automatically selected. Now I'm going to click on next. Now it's going to give you a list of those settings over here. And these settings with these values can be created in the Intune portal as a replacement to your on-premise GPO. Now what do we do next? Now we are going to click on next. Now it is going to actually create a settings catalog policy for us with all these settings and for all these parameters, right? So instead of creating a policy on our own for BitLocker pin, for disabling camera, for automatically updating Windows Update for Business, for configuring TPM, and for thousands other settings that I might have in my GPO. I just have to click on next. Let's call this migrating. Let's just do a next. It's going to ask us for scope tag. If you have any assignments, if you have any, obviously you'll create an assignment. And then when you click on next, it is going to say that it is going to deploy this policy. Our name of this policy is migrating GPOs to Intune. I'm just going to click on deploy. Right now, I'm not going to assign it to anybody. Now you see we have automatically come to the device configuration blade. Earlier, we were at the group policy analytics blade. What happened was automatically a policy was created and we automatically came to the configurations blade. Now I'm just going to search with that policy. And here you go, migrating GPOs to Intune. If I just click on this, if I scroll down in the configuration settings, let's take a look over everything that was configured in settings catalog by this policy. So if I expand this administrative template, you see over using administrative template, BitLocker settings were configured, like configuring TPM startup key, and all these settings are similar to the settings that we had in our GPU. Okay, and then for camera, like we had disabled camera, so over here camera not allowed. Windows update for business, whatever settings we had in our GPU, we see all of them over here. Now I did not have a lot of settings in my on-premise, therefore we don't see a lot of settings over here, but it doesn't matter how many you have or how many you don't, right? All you have to do is get that XML, upload it to the Intune portal. Intune is going to do that evaluation. Intune is going to tell you how many of those policies are supported in Intune UI natively, and Intune is going to create that policy for you using settings catalog and administrative template, and it can even deploy that policy for you as well. Okay, so this was another part that I wanted to highlight. First is figuring out of all the policies that you have in your on-premise, how many are actually needed in the modern cloud world. Once you have identified, you don't need to manually create all those policies. Just export that XML from your GPO, import it to Intune. Intune is going to evaluate, and Intune is going to create that policy for you. Now, coming to the last point, let's say that there is a policy which was not created. Like for example, let's take this typical example. Let's go back to devices. Let's go back to group policy analytics. And then over here, we saw that 69% of the policies have MDM support. What about the remaining 31%? What about this setting? What about this setting? What about this setting? What are we going to do about these settings? Well, given that they are not natively available in the UI, now we have got two options available. First option is we need to figure out what that setting is. Like for example, let's say this setting, configure use of hardware based encryptions for operating system drive, right? This setting cannot be configured in Intune via UI. Now all we have to do is we need to find out whether there is a CSP exposed by the operating system for this setting or not. So all I'll do is I'll do a CSP plus this. Now this is, if I click on this, it is going to open the CSP node for BitLocker, and then I'm going to get a list of all the CSPs that are available. Now I am going to check whether a CSP for that setting is available or not over here. Why am I going to do that? I'm going to do that because it is very much possible that the CSP is present. It is just that we cannot create a policy for that setting from the UI. The setting is not added in the UI, but the CSP is present. If that is the case, then all we need to do is let's say this was the CSP. Okay, let's say that this was the GPO, this was the CSP, but this could not be migrated to Intune because this option is not there in the UI, the required device encryption. Well, I know this one is present, the let's say identification field, right? All we have to do is find out the CSP, And then from Intune, once we know the CSP, then we have an alternative, right? All we have to do is go to Intune and then create something called OMA URI, right? So Windows 10 and later, and then you have an option of creating a custom profile. In a custom profile, you can enter OMA URIs, wherein you can target a specific CSP. So over here, you just have to enter the OMA URI, the data type over here, and that is going to fill in the gap, right? So again, let's just rewind and let's figure out what our approach for filling in the gap was. Our approach is, first we need to get more details into the settings that we were configuring from GPO, but it is not configurable natively from the Intune UI. Now, once we know the name of the setting, our next goal is figuring out whether a CSP exists or not. If a CSP exists, let's say CSP exists, this is yes, this is no. If a CSP exists, now how do we know whether a CSP exists or not? Well, if a CSP exists and is exposed by the operating system, it would be documented. And if it is documented, all you have to do is go to the Microsoft documentation and just that type CSP plus whatever that feature is. And then you will find whether that CSP exists or not. And if that CSP exists, what is the path of that CSP and what is the value? Once you find that, then you have to come to the Intune portal and you have to create a OMA URI. You have to create a OMA URI kind of a policy and then just deploy it, which is going to fill in the gap. Now, while we do that, Intune product team is working on rigorously to add more and more features into the UI. So let's say 3 years back, we had less features in UI. Now we have more features in UI, but the CSP always existed, right? So using the CSP, we are adding more and more features depending upon the feedback that we are receiving. So maybe that option in the UI is not there today. It might come in at a later point of time, but that doesn't mean if it's not there in the UI, you cannot create a policy. You can create a OMA UI as long as the CSP exists. Now, the next point, what do you do if the CSP does not exist? What if you had a policy that was deployed to the device using GPO, but now you cannot find it natively in the UI? The group policy analytics tool is not able to create a relevant corresponding policy for you. And when you check for it in the OMA URI, and when you check for its CSP, you're not able to find any. You're not able to find an OMA URI path for it. What is the alternative there? Well, is that the end of the road? The answer is no, because anything that you want to configure in a Windows device, which can be configured using a command, that can ultimately be configured via Intune as well. How? Because via Intune we can deploy something called a PowerShell script, right? Which makes our life so much easier. So all we have to do is create a PowerShell script, and that PowerShell script is going to come to rescue over here. Now, if we want to create a PowerShell script, we need to exactly know which registry that feature is going to change. Like for example, let's take an example of BitLocker. When we are talking about BitLocker, when we are deploying a policy of BitLocker from Intune, or we are creating an OMA URI for BitLocker, at the end of the day, there is some registry value which the policy is changing, right? So I can change that registry value manually. I can change that registry value by deploying an Intune policy, or I can deploy a script which is going to change that registry value. The outcome of all these three approaches is the same, right? That is, BitLocker is going to be turned on and device is going to get encrypted. So if in Intune UI the option is not there, if the CSP does not exist, then all we need to do is find out the registry that needs to be changed or edited or created to enable or disable that feature. Once we know that, all we need to do is we need to create a PowerShell script, deploy it from Intune, which is going to make that relevant change in devices registry. So let's call this PS1. Okay. Now, how do we create that PowerShell script? Now, That is something which is scenario specific. To turn on BitLocker, there would be a specific node in the registry. To turn on Windows Hello for Business, there will be a different node in the registry, obviously, right? Therefore, the node that we are going to reference in our PowerShell script is also going to change, but the logic is going to remain the same. If you don't find the CSP or OMA URI, just script it out, just find out the registry that needs to be changed, and then you will be good to go. So while we are talking about migrating the GPOs, this is what our approach should be. To summarize, first making sure that we know what is it that we actually need. Second, using the group policy analytics tool to find out which policies can be easily created by Intune UI and letting Intune do the policy creation. And thirdly, to fill in the gaps, figuring out if there are any OMA URIs available which can target a CSP if that is exposed by the operating system. If not, then just scripting it out. Okay, and lastly, we have to talk, the last point that we have to talk about, which is relevant to this transition from hybrid Azure Ready Join to cloud native, is migration of users' data. Because as I said, we were doing a factory reset of the device, or we were doing a wipe of the device, which means that the user's data was going away. So what are the things that we can do to make sure that that is accounted for? So first is, if you are going with this approach, you need to find out whether the end user is using OneDrive or not. If he is not using OneDrive, then the approach is going to change a lot. If he is using OneDrive, probably he would, if the device is enrolled to Intune, he would probably be part of M365 licensing E3, E5, and he should be having a license to use OneDrive as well, because he would be using the other Office suites as well. So that should be sorted. Now, if he is using OneDrive, then we have to strongly encourage our users to back their data in OneDrive. This is non-negotiable. We cannot have a user doing copy paste of the data in D drive or E drive or in some unknown location in C drive temp file or anything like that. All the data needs to be backed up in OneDrive. That is of paramount. Now, what do you do if the user is not doing it? What do you do if the user is not saving anything in the OneDrive manually and he is just creating files and saving it in desktop, or creating files and saving it in his download folder? Is there anything that you can do? Yes, you can create a policy which is going to back up the data from users' desktop or users' download or users' document to OneDrive automatically. And that feature is known as OneDrive known folder move, wherein in a policy in Intune, you pre-configure a specific location. That location can be, let's say that I'm creating a OneDrive known folder move policy in Intune, which I'm going to show you guys very shortly. And in that I mentioned desktop, downloads, and documents. These three locations. What will happen is, anytime any document is created in any of these three locations by the end user, it is automatically going to sync with OneDrive for Business, and that data is going to be backed. That policy is something that we can create so that we are not dependent on the end user to copy and paste everything into OneDrive. The policy is going to do a sync. Now, from Intune, there is something called a settings catalog. We can create a settings catalog policy. All you have to do is go to Windows 10 or later, and then under settings catalog, if you search with OneDrive over here, you will be able to see all the settings related to OneDrive that are present. And as you can see, it's a big list. And from there, you can select whichever ones are meeting your use case. Like over here, there are some settings that I have chosen. The first one is prevent the user from redirecting their Windows known folder move to their PC. So first is, we are creating a policy for known folder move, and then we are blocking the user from changing that setting. So once known folder move is selected, everything from their desktop, their documents, their download, that is going to be synced up with OneDrive. We have selected that. Second is silently sign in users into OneDrive sync app with their Windows credentials. What this means is, let's say that I take a device which is Azure Ready joined. I log into that device. OneDrive is already deployed to the device. Let's say that we have already deployed it from Intune, the Office suite, as well as the OneDrive. Now, user is going to be automatically signed into OneDrive, and the user does not have to launch OneDrive and enter his username and password. His Windows credentials are going to be used, and he is going to get a single sign-on behavior, and he is going to be automatically signed into OneDrive. That is what this setting is doing. So these are some suggestions on the top settings I recommend that you should be setting if you are moving from hybrid Azure AD join to cloud native, so that the user's data is accounted for and is not lost and gets all backed up in OneDrive, so that when you do that wipe of the device, with obviously after telling the user, there is no data loss. So second was silently signing in user. Third is continue syncing on metered network. I suggest setting this up because let's say for some reason the user is connected via hotspot. We don't want a scenario wherein if the user is connected via hotspot and he has created some important document, that document does not get synced with OneDrive just because he was connected on a metered network. So this is something that I would want you guys to share. Then require users to confirm large delete operations. So sometimes the user might delete a large file from OneDrive. This is just like a second layer of defense to make sure that user is not deleting something that he doesn't want to. Allow syncing of OneDrive accounts for specific organizations, and over here you have an option of entering the tenant ID. What this will let you achieve is the end user will only be able to log into OneDrive using a credential from your corporate tenant only. He will not be able to log into OneDrive using some other corporate credentials or some personal corporate credentials, because you are going to enter your company's tenant ID over here in under this section after enabling this, which will ensure that any credentials, any username with a UPN associated with that tenant is only able to log in. Show notifications to users after folder have been redirected. You can set that to yes. Use OneDrive files on demand. You can also set this to yes. What OneDrive files on demand means that the device is not going to download. The files are going to be there in Azure. You will see the folder structure in the device, and whenever you click on a specific folder, then that folder is going to get downloaded, or that file is going to get downloaded. That is what files on demand means. So in this way you save the local storage of the device. And you can see that there are a lot of other settings as well which are present related to OneDrive. So let me quickly show you guys where that is. So I'm at the configuration profile. Let me just create a new one, Windows 10 and later. This is going to be settings catalog, and then let's call this EAI demo OneDrive, and let's take a look over all the settings that are available. So all you have to do is click on add settings over here and do a search for OneDrive. This is going to show you all the settings that are present in the Intune portal related to OneDrive. So all I have to do is click on this, and then you will see there are so many settings that are present. And when you click on this I right next to any setting, it is going to give you a description of what that setting is going to do. Like block file downloads when the user is low on disk space, like for example. And then if you want to enable anything, if you want to disable anything, all that options are there. If you want to prevent the user from making any selection, you can do that. Like this one I have already spoken about, silently sign in users to OneDrive sync app with their Windows credentials. We really want that. Users if they use OneDrive file on demand, we really want that. If I go into the I, it says that this setting lets you control whether OneDrive file on demand is enabled for your organization. If you enable this setting, OneDrive file on demand will be turned on by default. If you disable, it will not be turned on. Now, what is OneDrive files on demand? It's a feature of OneDrive, which, as I said, it demands us, it downloads a specific file in the device or a folder in a device from OneDrive when you actually need it. Otherwise, everything is there in the OneDrive, but it is not there in your local storage. You just see the folder structure. Silently move Windows folder to Windows known folder to OneDrive, that is there. And I mean, there are so many settings, right? So all the settings that I showed you guys, those are the ones that I would I would want you guys to consider. And then I found a very good article on OneDrive as well. This also talks about few of the settings that I've already spoken about. Like for example, over here, using OneDrive files on demand. That is what I said. You don't want to wait for all the actual content to sync to the device and probably don't want to take up the disk space either. So if you tell OneDrive, OneDrive will keep all the data and it will just set up the folder structure for you. When you click on a specific file, that file will download on demand. So one is using OneDrive files on demand. Second is silently signing in user to OneDrive with their Windows credentials. I already spoke about this one. Silently moving the Windows known folder move. As I already said, you can select locations and data from that location will already be synced into Azure. And then preventing users from redirecting their Windows known folder move to PC. We already saw about this one. And then there are few others as well, which I would suggest you guys setting up. Like for example, continue syncing on metered network, require users to confirm large delete operations, allowing syncing of OneDrive accounts for a specific organization and entering your organization's tenant ID over here, and stuff like that. So yeah, as far as users data is concerned, set up OneDrive, set up the policies for OneDrive. So this is what your approach should be. These policies don't need to be set up after you have done the transition, because after you do the wipe, because to do the, so this is what the steps would be. Step 1 will be creating a policy for users data. And once you have created this policy, OneDrive will be set up, all the data will be backed up. Then the step 2 will be doing a transition of that device from hybrid Azure AD joined to Azure AD joined, that is going cloud native, whichever approach you end up choosing. And no matter whichever approach you choose, you will have to reset the device or you have to wipe the device. And since you have already done this step before, after you wipe the device and after, let's say, you end up doing autopilot of the device becomes business ready, the end user logs in, the Office suite gets installed, he gets this policy, and since he gets this policy, OneDrive gets automatically configured, he gets logged in, and the moment he opens OneDrive, everything is there in the OneDrive because this policy reached the device even before the reset was done. So everything that was there in end user's device, that automatically got backed up in OneDrive because you had configured known folder move and all of that, right? So backing up users data, very important. I will suggest, even if you're not transitioning right now, still if the end user has licenses to use OneDrive, which they should, then they should be very strongly encouraged to make use of OneDrive, which is going to make your life so much easier. And then it is going to make your life so much easier later on as well when you're doing this migration activity. So that is pretty much it, guys. Like in this tutorial, my intention was understanding all these transitioning / migration approaches, understanding which one meets our use case and which one we should choose, and understanding the nuances which are associated with each of these methodologies. So that's pretty much it, guys. I hope this has been informative for you. I would like to thank you for viewing. This is your friend Saurabh Sarkar signing off.